When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Grease Comedy channel. Today's video will be continuing our Song of Ice and Fire, or specifically a Game of Thrones reread. Today we'll be doing Ned 5. So, again, this is actually a very short chapter. In comparison to the last few chapters we've been doing, a lot of them have been at least 10 pages. This chapter is only about 8 pages long, but it's very important to how the story goes. Up to now, and with Ned, we've kind of seen Ned just getting adjusted to King's Landing, or his journey there. This is the first chapter where Ned really starts trying to put the pieces together and figuring out what has happened with Jon, Arryn, and King's Landing as a whole. So that's what the main focus of this chapter is going to be, and how Ned goes about finding out this information. But before we get into the video, if you guys want to see more of these rereads and you want to stay notified, consider subscribing for those, as they are posted every single week. Also, as a thing I do not plug very often, if you guys do want to actually listen to these on Spotify, I do have a Spotify with the channel. I only upload the rereads on there, but if you do want to listen to them on Spotify, just for if you're driving and you're listening to these, maybe it's just easier. I know I do use Spotify for like History of Westeros and their podcasts, which are fantastic. But yeah, consider doing that as well. The link will be in the description. So let's get into it. We're going to start on page 250. So the page opens like with how I have in the background, with Pycelle and Ned talking. Pycelle notes that Lord Arryn's death was a great sadness to us all, and that he would be honored to answer any questions about his passing. So again, we're going to start off with Ned interrogating Pycelle on this, and Ned starts out very subtle, and it slowly gets a little bit not so subtle about what he's questioning. And another thing I want to point out here is the way Pycelle goes about helping Ned. As we've seen with Varys and also now Pycelle, everyone wants to make themselves as useful as possible to Ned, even though they have ulterior motives that they're covering up with being helpful. And that's something we talk about a lot with characters like Varys, is if you're not helpful, if you're not a good spy master and telling all these things, then what stops the higher-ups, the High Lords, from getting rid of you? You know, Varys is not a strong, man. He's not a fighting man. He's not a great lord. It's the same kind of concept with Pycelle as well. So Pycelle then asks Ned if he wants any refreshments. Wine does not agree with Pycelle, but iced milk would be great on a hot day like today. No, Ned does agree that it's very hot, and this is something that Robert did warn him when they were coming down, and that even Ned's clothes are starting to stick to him, and the poor are coming to the river to catch even a little bit of wind, which again really shows how warm it is. And Ned, again, is trying to adapt to his surroundings, as he is very much used to the cold. He's now into the warm and the heat. Ned also does accept Pycelle's offer and gets some milk. Now, we see this idea of where the show got this idea that Pycelle was very much like a pedophile type, when Pycelle calls for a young girl to fetch the milk for the two, and he sets his hands on his stomach while they wait. And that gets us into page 251. So, continuing into page 251, Pycelle then notes how the common folk believe that the last year of summer is always the hottest, and that sometimes he envies the northerners with their wintry snows. Again, it kind of shows how a lot of people south don't really understand the north. And I guess Pycelle is kind of making just a little light joke here, but there's a lot of people that have this same sentiment that, oh, the winter snows, they're all nice and all. And it's like, no, I mean, winter is really bad. And when you have it where it's cold weather all of the time, it's a very hard life. So again, I know Pycelle wasn't going that deep with it, but it's something that I do think is interesting to note when you look at some people that make light of the northern conditions. Pycelle then kind of gets off track. And something I want you guys to learn and think about when this whole chapter is going on, especially the segment with Pycelle in it, Ned isn't really talking much. Ned is this person that's always been described as a quiet wolf, and we see how Ned uses his position and how he can kind of intimidate people into just having them talk. He can stand by, watch, and observe, and it's one of the things that makes him a very interesting character, that he is someone that watches others and kind of figures out what they're up to. And he does a lot of that in this chapter as well. And again, this chapter is a really big reason to me why I don't think Ned is stupid, especially in how he goes about King's Landing. So Pycelle, again, like I said, is speaking on another hot summer during King Makar's reign, in which it was so hot that people foolishly believed the long summer had finally come about. But in the end, it only lasted 7 years, and a brutal winter followed afterward. Again, this is more foreshadowing to the idea that the long night could be coming once again. The idea that this summer has lasted way too long, it's extremely hot, and now there's going to be a terrible winter like there was in King Makor's reign. And Pycelle, after this, seems like he's almost fallen asleep. Like he's sleepless. That's how Ned describes it in his own POV. But all the while, Pycelle is kind of playing this role perfectly to me. Pycelle is basically showing that he's kind of this old man that's useless, and he just spouts out random knowledge that no one particularly cares about, especially Ned in this moment. When Ned's come here really looking about answers for Jon Arryn's death, Pycelle is kind of playing that character really, really well, and it's something that keeps him alive for so long, and something that Tyrion is going to see through. And again, he continues saying that Ned does not want to hear about this stuff, and he brings the subject back to Lord Arryn. And as this is happening, the milk is brought back by the serving girl. Now, something that I think is a little slyly done here by George is that Ned notes that this milk was overly sweet, which I think is a reference to what is going on. Pycelle is being this character that's basically saying he's being overly helpful, more or less. He's trying to help Ned in any way possible, while also avoiding answers, not really giving Ned the answers that Pycelle actually knows. And it's also a reflection of the South, and specifically King's Landing as a whole. Everyone appears sweeter than they are. And as we're going to learn with Littlefinger and how he tells Ned, everyone is a spy here. And the idea that people like Varys, right, they act very sweet and they try to make themselves helpful, but all the while they're scheming behind your back. So that's an interesting point that George puts into on this milk being overly sweet to a degree that's suspicious. Now, Pycelle then begins to recount that Jon Arryn's signs were there for sure. He was harboring many stresses on his shoulders, ruling the realm. Now, Pycelle is a good liar here, because Pycelle knows that it was likely poison. He does kind of figure that out. And I think when you look at the way things happened, I think Pycelle is really playing into things that were truthful, but not saying the full truth. And that is something that I think when you look at liars, right? The best liars, and especially in A Song of Ice and Fire, will have a lot of truth in that lie. And they'll twist one part of it, but the whole thing will be factual. So it's harder to, I guess, uncover. And this is the interesting part here, is that Jon Arryn did have a lot of stresses. I don't think anyone can deny that. And Pycelle basically says that, saying, you know, Lysa is not the most sane woman. He has a sickly boy. He's basically having to run the realm because Robert just is not doing it, and he's a terrible king. He's bankrupting the realm. He's having to try and balance that as well. And also, during this, which Pycelle doesn't bring up either, is that Jon Arryn suspects that Cersei and Robert's kids are not actually theirs. So there's a lot of stress going on right now with Jon Arryn. So Pycelle's not exactly wrong on that point, but he's not going the full route of what really is going on. Now, again, Pycelle doesn't know necessarily definitively that it was poison, and Pycelle also doesn't know who would have poisoned him either way. So again, there's only so much Pycelle could tell here, but he definitely is hiding something from Ned. The idea that Jon Arryn was researching Robert and Cersei's kids. And he basically continues like what I said, saying that Lysa and his sickly boy basically stressed out Jon as well, and Lysa never left Robert's side, and by Robert I mean Robb and Arryn, and babied him a lot. And again, Pycelle subtly throws in another little jab, saying that Jon was no young man, and he was quite burdened. And that's the thing, that Jon Arryn is this man that is, you know, getting up there in age. So the idea that you could kill him with a poison and have it be played off as very natural makes a lot of sense. That's why Littlefinger's plan works so well, is that for a lot of reasons, it kind of seems natural. It doesn't really seem like poison would have been involved. It's vastly different, say, if you poison a younger person. Like when Joffrey gets poisoned, say the side effects hadn't been so bad, but say Joffrey had drank some wine or something at the feast for his wedding feast with Marjorie, and then like a day or two later, he starts feeling sick and then gets the shivers or whatever and dies. That would be much more suspicious because you're like a young man in the prime of his health, all of a sudden gets sick and dies. Where with Jon Arryn, it's not so. You can make a lot of excuses like Pycelle is doing, and it can add up a lot. But Ned is not a fool. He sees through some things that Ned kind of has this feeling during this conversation that Pycelle's not telling him everything. And Pycelle's even going to question his loyalty, or Ned is going to question Pycelle's loyalty by the end of this. He's not going to say it, blatantly, but it is something that Ned thinks about. And that gets us into page 252. So moving on, Pycelle notes that Jon had a tired feeling about him, but Pycelle says he doubts that now. So the idea here is that Pycelle is saying that Jon kind of just seemed like he was being worn down. He didn't really seem himself for a year. And now Pycelle just thinks that he was probably sickly. Again, I think that's Pycelle just kind of covering up what was going on. Ned then asks about Jon's final illness, to which Pycelle starts saying that Jon one night came asking for a book and seemed troubled, and the next he was extremely sick and in pain. At first, Maester Coleman thought it was a chill, but it kept getting worse. Pycelle states that he then tended to the care of Jon but could do nothing, which Ned, again, is not stupid. He says, well, why did you send Coleman away? Because this is a very valid question. Coleman is, again, tending to Jon, and at first, again, thinks it's a chill, but it gets worse. So Coleman is understanding that something else is going on. Now, Pycelle, there's a very much a switch in tone here, where Pycelle has been very kind to Ned. He's been very helpful. We specifically note that Pycelle has an icy cold response, saying that Coleman was young and beneath his abilities. And sometimes he cannot understand the frailties of an old man's body, and Pycelle feared he would kill him. So the idea here is that Pycelle is trying to say, more or less, that Coleman was doing so many things on trying to help Jon that Pycelle feared that they were going to kill him because Jon Arryn is an older man. He couldn't take as much abuse to the body, whatever is what he's trying to say. And what we really know here is that Pycelle was trying to prevent Jon Arryn from being healed at all costs. Because if Coleman was to figure out that this was a poison, maybe he could have tried to stop it. Maybe Jon Arryn could have lived. Pycelle didn't want that. Pycelle wanted Jon Arryn to die because, again, Jon Arryn had figured out the parentage stuff, or at least was on that path. So again, that's the big point there that Ned kind of thinks is very suspicious. Again, pointing at he understands something else is going on. Now, Ned then asks if Jon said anything before his death, to which Pycelle recounts that Jon said Robert many times. But again, Pycelle wasn't really clear on which one he meant, his son, who was named Robert, or the king. The king, for all that was worth, it did come, because again, Robert looked to Jon Arryn as a father, and also it is the hand of the king. And again, we see how Robert is very loving to the people around him, that he, thinks of his family. And I mean, when I say thinks of as family, I mean people like Ned, like Jon, Stannis, and Renly. Robert doesn't really view them as family or being close to them. When we see that Bran falls out of the tower, or is pushed out of the tower, let's say that instead, we see that Robert stays with Ned and Catelyn all throughout the night while Bran is, in the bed and being tended to. So again, we do see that Robert is that kind of that caring person. But while this is being said, Robin, his son, was never allowed into the room for Lysa fearing him becoming ill. Now, this should set off a lot of flags in Ned's mind. And this is something Ned doesn't pick up on, but this is something that, as the reader, we should also be thinking about. I know it's very early in the story, but if we go back to the letter that she sends, she basically hints at that the Lannisters killed Jon Arryn, or basically straight up says it. But we also learn here that apparently she was too afraid to let Robin into the room because of Jon Arryn's illness, quote unquote. That's very contradictory. And Ned should be thinking, well, why would she do that? If she already thought that Jon Arryn was poisoned, why is she not letting Robin? It doesn't add up. And that's one thing where there is a little bit of a hiccup in Lysa's and Littlefinger's cover-up of this story that, like, that's a little odd that Ned doesn't really pick up on that. But maybe you could make the idea that maybe Lysa, during the moment when Jon is dying, which again, because here's the thing, we know, so it couldn't be this idea that, like, Lysa sees that Jon Arryn is dying, and maybe at first she thought it was an illness, and then all of a sudden she's like, wait, it could be poison. That's not true, because we know Lysa helped poison Jon Arryn, so it's a really odd thing, like, that's very contradictory. So then Pycelle finishes saying Robert's love for Jon was strong, and Ned asks whether there were no final words. Pycelle then responds with saying when all hope seemed lost, he gave him milk of the poppy to ease his suffering. And the last thing he uttered to the king and Lysa was the line, "The seed is strong," to which Pycelle says is about his son. Now, us, the readers and the viewers, we know that's not true. That's not what Jon Arryn meant. But again, Pycelle does a very good cover story, right? Like, Pycelle says it's about his son, it's about his heir. And that makes a lot of sense, right? But when you look at it, you're like, the seed is strong. Jon Arryn was not a blind man. But again, Pycelle is playing off the idea that Jon Arryn was heavily medicated with milk of the poppy, which is basically a drug in this world. Yeah, he was basically just trying to play it off, which makes sense. I think Pycelle's cover story is pretty good. I think it does take someone looking into some of the more suspicious activities to really figure out what actually happened. But yeah. But after that, Jon was dead by the next morning. And that gets us into page 253. Moving into page 253, Ned then questions this, saying, was there anything unnatural about his death? And Pycelle then retorts, saying it was a sadness, but he served for nearly 40 years, and this was nothing unusual, to which Ned responds, saying Lysa did not think the same. Now, this is weird, because I'm not sure if Lysa told anyone her suspicions about what happened, but why would Ned, who, again, we see by the end of this conversation, he doesn't trust Pycelle, why would he tell her this? Because this is supposed to be a secret, right? That Lysa is basically telling Ned that the Lannisters killed him and all this. It's a weird thing that Ned straight up tells Pycelle that. Pycelle then responds saying that grief can change someone and that Lysa was never the strongest of wills and she saw enemies everywhere, which honestly, again, from Pycelle is pretty correct. Lysa sees enemies everywhere, and it doesn't help that Littlefinger is also manipulating her, but again, Pycelle has a very reasonable explanation. And again, let's remember here, Pycelle doesn't know that for a fact that Jon Arryn was poisoned, and also doesn't know for a fact who did it. So when the idea that Lysa is putting this on the Lannisters, Pycelle kind of knows for a fact that's not really true, right? The Lannisters didn't poison Jon Arryn. So again, that's an interesting idea because Pycelle is right on the money on that. Ned then asks once more if he believes it was a sudden illness, and Pycelle says yes. Well, what else could it be? And Ned, again, ever being the quiet wolf, because again, remember, Ned in this entire time I've been talking on this conversation, Ned has been very blunt. Ned has not joked. Ned has not said words that were not really needed. Ned just gets straight to the point on the questions he's asking, and Ned quietly suggests poison. Pycelle retorts this, saying these are not the free cities, and that the Maesters could have seen the signs, to which there were not any, and he asks who would kill such a lord. Now, this is an interesting point, because the Maesters, as we do know, study the poisons, and Pycelle says that they would have known. But again, is this a reach of their skill? Because we do see at times where Maesters don't realize that it was poison. So I think that's an interesting little tidbit there from Pycelle. So that gets us into page 254. Moving into page 254, Ned then suggests that poison is a woman's weapon, to which Pycelle adds on eunuchs and cowards as well. And again, this is Pycelle's specialty. He throws blame onto others while showing himself as old and feeble. He tells Ned not to trust Varys, to which Ned already knows. Again, Ned's not stupid. He doesn't trust Varys. Why would he? And again, Ned is not really on the right track here. He thinks that Cersei, or is implying that Cersei poisoned Jon Arryn, which we know isn't true. But again, looking at the circumstances and the evidence that Ned has been given, and even things that have happened in the past with his suspicions, it is, in my opinion, a very logical claim. Lysa is someone that, through marriage, he is now related to. Why would she lie to him? And that's the thing, that's the genius of Littlefinger's plan, is that there's really only a couple ways someone would find out that it was Lysa and him that did it. And the only real red flag you see, Ned didn't really pick up on it. So again, I think Ned comes to a decent conclusion, just not the right one. Ned then thanks him for his time and asks to examine the book that Jon was reading. Again, Pycelle tries to kind of discount this and basically say it was a dim read about the great lineages of the house, but he will send for it when he finds it. And then Ned is going to leave, but he asks for one more question. Was the queen there when Jon died? To which Pycelle says no, she was out for Joffrey's name day at Casterly Rock with her father. Again, Ned is coming to a very logical conclusion. Cersei is not around when the crime happens. She is far away. So just in case that she was found out, she wouldn't even be in King's Landing. Again, another logical conclusion to come to, but also could you maybe even go the opposite? If Cersei and the Lannisters were not in King's Landing, how did they poison Jon? Now, that's an interesting point you could make as well. And another thing that I think is very suspicious that Ned is going to pick up on is that Pycelle says himself that he was the one who sent the raven. And Ned remarks something that old Nan taught him: dark wings, dark words. And that gets us into page 255. So again, moving into it, Pycelle remarks that the fishwives say that, but not all ravens and messages are bad, like the one about Bran. He then says, "Come to me whenever you need. I am here to serve." Again, Pycelle trying to make himself useful. But we see that Ned is processing this information, as in his own mind he questions, yes, but who do you actually serve? Which is great investigating skills from Ned, because something is out of place. Ned knows that, and maybe he doesn't come to the right conclusion, but he understands there's some fishy stuff going on here in King's Landing. Ned then is heading back to the Tower of the Hand when he finds Arya balancing on one toe. He instantly asks what she is doing, and Syrio tells her she needs balance, and Ned then asks why she must do it at the top of the stair, to which she replies, "A water dancer never falls." And again, I think this is some good teaching, right? You're going to have more focus. You're going to be trying harder if there is a risk for injury. Now, it is more dangerous, but it is an interesting way to conquer fear and things of that nature, to which Arya is going to have to use those skills quite a lot. Arya then more seriously asks, will Bran come live with him now? And Ned says not for a while, until he gets his strength back. Arya asks, what will Bran do when he comes of age? And again, I think Arya is nervous to ask this question, not because of just Bran, but also herself. I think Arya questions, like, who is she going to be when she grows up, right? It's that idea that Arya's had, I think, in the back of her mind for a while, is identification, right, for her. Like, who is she as a person? And what relevance does she have in the society where she's kind of been taught and told her whole life that women need to be basically what Sansa is. They need to be a lady. They need to be able to stitch well. They need to be able to cook, or well, not even really cook, but keep accountings and stuff like that. And I think Arya is worried about that. Ned then responds that he has time to figure that out, but for now, it is enough that he is alive, which is very true. And I think Ned brings a lot of wisdom, is that I think one of the best things I think you can, tell someone when they're struggling on what they're going to be when they grow up, or what, you're going to do, is that you have time to figure those things out. And that's something that I think, if you're in high school or whatever you have, whatever country you live in, right before you go into the working field, you have kind of time to figure that out. And it's fine to not know what you're going to do. I mean, I am someone that has changed majors in college, and that did set me back, but I didn't like what I was doing in the first part of that. So again, I think that's some great advice by Ned. And I think Ned is someone that really understands his children really well and is a very good father for the most part. Ned then recalls when they had got the message and how he had taken Sansa and Arya to the heart tree in the city and had given thanksgiving to the old gods, and Sansa and Arya had fallen asleep under its watchful eyes. Again, playing under this idea that, is someone watching them, right? Could Bran be watching them through these eyes? And I think it's a very interesting idea that Ned also is paying homage to the old gods, that they still have some power even this far south. And I think very curiously is that Sansa dreams of Bran and that she sees him smiling. Could Sansa have seen Bran when he was smiling over writing? So in the last Bran chapter, we see Bran in his room, and he is like really happy. He's really smiling, and for the first time in a while since he's woken up, because he's going to be able to ride a horse. Tyrion gives that saddle. Is that something that Sansa is seeing? Is she getting a bit of a dream? And I think that's interesting because we always look at Sansa and say she is really this character that is the least connected to the North. She has the least amount of wolf dreams. She doesn't seem like she really had any working powers, and her source to that connection, Lady, died very quickly. So again, interesting. And I am someone, again, that I've talked about in these rereads where I'm trying to look into Sansa more as a character. And this is one of those moments that I didn't really remember from past rereads. So I thought that was something that was interesting to note. And then we continue into page 256. Arya notes how Bran wanted to be a knight of the King's Guard, and Ned notes how he won't be able to do that now, and there was no point really lying to her. And I think that's interesting, is that Ned is this father that really expects his children to grow up fast. He doesn't hide the world from them. He shows them kind of what the world is, and he doesn't lie about it. Now, that doesn't mean Ned, tells them everything and horrifies his children. I mean, when Arya is still seeing war and the horrors of war, as we'll see mainly in A Storm of Swords and a little bit of Clash as well, but we'll kind of see those issues, and Arya will learn even more about the horrors of the world. Ned notes that Bran has other things he can do. He may become a mighty lord of a holdfast, or sit on a small council for a king, or become a high septon. But Ned sadly thinks that he will also never run with his wolf, or lie with a woman, or have children. Which, again, is very true. I mean, Bran is really broken from such a young age. Like, a lot of the things that kids Bran's age would experience, Bran is never going to be able to do. And we're told straight up that Bran is not going to have children either. So Ned really reflects on that and really shows that, I mean, Bran could do some great things, but there's a lot of things Bran is missing out on. Arya then pipes up hearing this and asks, could she be a high septon or builder of castles? Ned then, kissing her, says, you will marry and have sons that will rule castles and such. And Arya instantly says no. That is Sansa. And she begins her balancing again as Ned sighs and leaves. And again, it's this idea that Ned is not really willing to work with Arya about her future, right? Because women in this society really only have one role. And I think this is something House of the Dragon really did well. It's something that Game of Thrones I don't think did as well. But House of the Dragon did a really good job of showing, especially Alicent as a character. This is one of my reasons why I loved Alicent in House of the Dragon so much, is because they really explored this theme and the idea of women in the society. And Arya is very much like a Rhaenyra, where she doesn't want to just be birthing children. She doesn't want to be this woman that has to marry some guy that she may or may not even like. She wants to explore the world. She wants to learn how to use a sword. She wants to sail. She even thinks about being a high septon, which I think is absolutely crazy. But she has more for her life, and Ned wants her to be kind of like Sansa, but to a degree, Ned also sees Lyanna in her, and I think that's something that also scares Ned because of what Lyanna did, because of the fallout, regardless of what you think really happened with Lyanna. Lyanna, you can say, didn't make some good choices. As Ned reaches his room in the tower, he's informed that Littlefinger seeks immediate audience, and Ned tells Alan to put him in his solar until he is ready. And getting further into the Littlefinger portion of this chapter, I do want to say, background image, I couldn't really find one of Ned and Littlefinger in his solar that was actually good, so I just used a random picture of them walking. So if you guys are confused, that's why. Ned then enters the solar to see him perched on the window looking outside, watching the Knights of the Kingsguard practice. He even notes that if only Selmy's mind was as nimble as his blade, the council meetings would be more lively. Again, showing us how Littlefinger plays the game with his mind, but also showing us some of Littlefinger's jealousy for what he could never be. Because that's something I think Littlefinger is looking at with these knights, and to a degree, I think Littlefinger wishes he could fit in more, that he could be someone that could wield a sword and be extremely strong. But he's not that. He's just not that person. He doesn't have the arms, the strength, even the speed to do that. And Littlefinger just pokes holes at their weaknesses, like Selmy saying he's not as quick-witted or things like that. But it also kind of foreshadows what we're going to see with, or how Barristan will have to try and rule in Book 5. Ned then fires back, saying Barristan is one of the finest knights in the realm, and up to this point, Ned has taken a liking and grown a respect for Barristan, which is very obvious to see why. Barristan is very similar to Ned. Barristan is a soldier, he seems very honorable, and Barristan is not a politician at all. Barristan is very similar to Ned in that regard, which is why I think it's so interesting to watch Barristan in Book 5 try and do what Ned does. The characters are very, very similar between the two. Littlefinger then responds saying that Barristan did unseat the Hound last year and was even the champion 4 years back. And again, this is a point of showing how good Barristan still is. Barristan may be out of his prime, maybe getting older, but he's still extremely skilled. Ned then finishes the page asking why Littlefinger is here, which gets us into page 257. Continuing on, Littlefinger tells Ned that he made a promise to Cat to help him, which again, Ned thinks that, promise or no, he cannot trust Littlefinger. He is too clever. Again, let's now look at this, right? The three big manipulators on the small council, who are Pycelle, Varys, and Littlefinger, Ned, in the span of one chapter, has stated he doesn't trust any of these people. So again, that should tell you a lot about how Ned is adjusting to King's Landing. Ned asks then, have you brought me something? To which Littlefinger says, 4 someones. Littlefinger asks Ned if he has questioned Jon Arryn's servants, which, again, would be a great lead. Go after the people that were in Jon Arryn's service. And Ned has already done that, basically. He says he wishes he could, but Lysa had taken all of them back to the Eyrie, something Ned is not happy with, as it made his job harder, which is completely true. Because here's the thing, if you're Ned, right, and you're trying to prove that the Lannisters poisoned Jon Arryn, how are you supposed to do that when you're not really given any evidence? All the people that would have been close to Jon Arryn that possibly could have witnessed this poisoning aren't even here. That is your second red flag to some suspicious activity by Lysa. That could be something that Ned could be thinking about in the back of his mind. Littlefinger then says that not all of them are gone. There are a few who remain, but most notable, a squire to Jon. Ned thinks this is a key because a squire would know a lot going on close to Jon, which is completely true. And we see this like a lot with someone like Podrick with Tyrion. Podrick knows a ton of what's going on with Tyrion. And again, I want to reinforce this, right? Is that Littlefinger has spies everywhere. And Ned doesn't exactly pick up on that right away, which is something I do think Ned is a little slow on to react to. But Littlefinger continues saying the squire is Sir Hugh of the Vale and was knighted by the king after Jon's death. Which, again, you would say is a little suspicious, knighted right after Jon Arryn's death. Now, Ned wants to send for all of them, but Littlefinger interrupts him, telling him to come to the window. Littlefinger explains to Ned how he is being watched, how the armorer outside is a spy for Varys, and the guard on the wall is a spy for the Queen. But I want to notice here that Littlefinger doesn't put himself into this group of people. He doesn't point out any of his spies, which is something a little different than what we see in the show. In the show, this scene plays out very differently, where when they're walking in this courtyard or whatever they're at in the show, Littlefinger points out Varys' spy, Cersei's spy, but then he also points out his own spy. And that's something that isn't actually present in this first scene. And that gets us into page 258. So again, Littlefinger reinforces saying, why do you think he hid Catelyn? Ned is basically, I think, Ned understandably is annoyed to learn this, and he backs away from the window as he notices that the guard is watching him. He then asks if everyone is a spy in this cursed city, which, again, I think is interesting that Ned hasn't figured this out already. Just based upon, what Littlefinger said about Catelyn being and how he had to hide her, and just overall the way information is being told, right? He knows that Varys is a master spy master. It's a little weird to me that Ned didn't realize that he was being spied on. Littlefinger then jokes saying yes, but he asks Ned a very interesting question. And this is going to show the differences between kind of the Northerners and Ned, and someone like Littlefinger, who has basically turned King's Landing into his playground. He asks, is there someone in his service he completely trusts? To which Ned says yes. Because again, Ned is someone that connects with his men. He inspires loyalty and trust. So he does have those people that he would trust. And Littlefinger responds saying, the wiser answer was no, but send whoever this is to Sir Hugh. The Spider and the Queen cannot watch everyone all the time. Again, very true. You can have as many spies as you want, but they can't be everywhere. And that's very true. Littlefinger does give Ned some good advice here. But the thing I want to talk about here is that Littlefinger is this person that really doesn't trust anyone. And to a degree, it's understandable why. But on the other side of that is, you can have people that are completely loyal to you. And Ned is kind of, I feel like, a person that symbolizes that there are a lot of people that after the Starks go out are completely loyal to them. Ned then says that he is grateful for Littlefinger's help and says maybe he was wrong to distrust him. Now, I want to point out this is a major distinction here, is that Ned is not saying that all of a sudden he trusts Littlefinger. He is saying that maybe he was wrong to distrust him. So, again, I don't think this is this big moment where Ned is like saying, oh, all of a sudden now he trusts Littlefinger. I think it's more of an idea that he's giving Littlefinger some appreciation, but I still don't believe that Ned actually does trust Littlefinger. And Littlefinger even responds to this saying, Ned, you are basically a slow learner, and that distrusting me was the wisest thing you have done since stepping off your horse. Now, to Littlefinger's point, I think Ned in certain regards is a very slow learner. When it comes to the spy thing like we talked about, I think he's very slow, but Ned does put things together quite well. I mean, in his conversation with Pycelle, he kind of picks up on a lot of things, and he doesn't come to the right conclusion, but from the information he's being told, it makes a lot of sense where he's going with that. And even with how he distrusts Varys, he distrusts Littlefinger, I think Ned gets a little bit too hated on for being stupid, I guess, in this opening book. I think he does what he can, and I think he does better than most people would in his situation. But thank you guys all for watching this video on Ned 5. Hope you guys all enjoyed, and I will see you guys all in the next video. Next week, we are going to be doing Jon. So again, always excited to do Jon. He is one of the best POVs in book 1 and of the entire story. So we'll get into that next week, and I hope to see you guys all then. Bye, guys.